I've never been so proud to be British and to be part of the Olympic movement as I am on this day at this moment. Lord Sebastian Coe's rallying speech during a momentous opening ceremony for the London 2012 Olympics that famously had everything from Bex to Bradley, Bond to Bean, and brilliance from Danny Boyle. Coe declared London 2012 will see the very best of us. 7 years on, those words certainly ring true. This is an Anything But Footy, the unashamedly Olympic and Paralympic sport-focused podcast, and this is our first summer special, remembering the highs, lows, dramas and celebrations of all things 2012. I'm John.
And I'm Michael, and there were plenty of highs, lows, there was plenty of drama, and there was plenty of good stuff to remember, of course, in London 2012. We're going to recall some of our favourite memories. We're going to recall some of those medal moments. We're going to recall 17 wonderful days of competition and 2 ceremonies as well. An opening ceremony that really set the tone from Danny Boyle, and a closing ceremony that featured, amongst others, the Kaiser Chiefs, the Spice Girls and the Who brought the curtain down on London 2012. What a glorious summer it was.
And if we miss something special to you in the next 30 minutes or so, please tell us at Anything But F on Twitter, or message us on Insta or Facebook. So, this was the third time London had staged the Games. No other city had reached that milestone at that point. The motto was Inspire a Generation. 204 nations took part, 10,768 athletes, nearly half of them were women, 5,992 were men, 4,776 women. There were 302 events in 26 sports, right across 39 disciplines, and it all started on the 27th of July 2012 and ended August the 12th. That was the Olympics. The Paralympics obviously carried on a little longer, which we will talk about. The final medal table for Team GB was led overall by the United States, followed by China, and of course hosts Great Britain in third place. 65 medals in total, 29 gold, 17 silver, 19 bronze. It was quite an achievement, and as you've already said, Michael, quite the summer. But do you remember in 2005 when we won it after failing with some World Championship athletics bid at Pickett's Lock for 1999 or something, or 2001, something like that? It was very strange. There was general pessimism before the Olympics. The transport wouldn't work. No one knew what to do with the stadium. There was huge rows about horse guards being used, and particularly Greenwich Park, where, of course, the 3-day eventing and the show jumping had took place. It was just absolutely everyone was negative about it. Do you remember that, Michael?
I remember the huge negativity. I also remember, because I'm old enough, born, as we've often said, in an Olympic year, a Montreal Olympic year in 76, both of us. I remember Birmingham bidding. I remember Manchester's bids as well. And, you know, they went close, but they were never really going to get on the IOC radar. Who would have remembered Manchester 2000 in the way that we recall Sydney 2000? I remember having a discussion with my dad saying, you know, I'd love London. This is the city that I was born on the edge of London. I was born in South Hertfordshire, so I was just on the edge of the M25, and I remember saying, I'd love London. Essentially, it's my home city. I'd love London to host the Olympic Games. My dad said, London will never host the Olympic Games, son. London is too busy. London has too many issues. London will never be able to host the Olympic Games. We'd have a better bet if we put Milton Keynes forward. And those were words that I remember my dad saying to me, and they were words that lived with me. And, you know, back in the early noughties, when there was discussion about London bidding for the Games, I was working in the northeast of England. I was working for a local TV channel. And there was a video that we used to play on a loop every ad break on the TV channel. And it was the bid video for London 2012. You might recall it, right, where they had guys with brushes and street cleaners and things, thinking that they were playing hockey or doing modern pentathlon and whatever. And then brilliantly, on the first day of July 2005, I was actually laid off from that job. And on the 6th of July 2005, the upside of it all was I was sat in front of my telly at home with no job, no place to go, watching watching all those events unfold in Singapore and watching London get the games. The City of London. That was the words, wasn't it? That I don't think any of us seriously believed was going to happen. But yes, those were the words that were announced. All the photographers were gathered in front of Paris. Everyone was expecting Paris to get the bid. All the cameras were in Paris, ready for the huge celebrations at the Eiffel Tower. At Trafalgar Square, we were, I think, probably just waiting for a little bit of a afternoon where we said, well, we gave it a good go. We gave it a better go than Birmingham had and Manchester had twice. But, it wasn't to be for us this time. But then those words, the City of London. And we had, didn't we, 7 years to prepare.
I tell you what, I was in Trafalgar Square when it was announced, and Kelly Holmes jumped higher than probably Dalton Grant, who was our best high jumper at that point, in the air. She was absolutely beside herself. I think Danny Crates, the Paralympian, was there. Steve Cram, I think, might have been there as well. And the noise in Trafalgar Square, I think I kissed people, and I was there working. I actually kissed the person next to me because, as you say, it was so unexpected, and those celebrations in Singapore, and we must say the late Dame Tessa Jowell, was instrumental in getting Tony Blair, whatever you think about him, but that Prime Minister to back the government's bid and Tessa Jowell's bid with Ken Livingstone, again, whatever you think about him, they had to come together and they had to support this bid. And I'll always remember Lord Coe, who was brought in after a few years. You mentioned 7 years to plan it. He was brought in after a few years where, the planning wasn't going well. It was led by, I think, Barbara Cassani.
She'd run an airline, hadn't she?
Yeah, Go, it was called, and frankly, she needed to, and she did. And Seb Coe came in, and I remember him saying to me so many times when I interviewed him, when they looked at the Olympic Park, and Ken Livingstone had said, we need somewhere to regenerate a part of London, which was basically a bunch of fridges. It was a mound full of fridges, as Seb Coe always did. Yeah, but there was a lot of controversy about people being moved. There was the Foreman fish factory that needed to get moved and had to get moved to make way for the Olympic Stadium. So I do remember, the elation of winning it. Obviously, the next day, July 7th, totally destroyed everything that we'd been talking about and planning because of the terrorist attack in London that killed 52 people, and that obviously added a huge then security cost to London 2012, and rightly so as well. But then the 7 years of planning, and it, even to the point of I kind of started my role of Olympic correspondent in January 2012. And things didn't really pan out brilliantly until literally the moment that James Bond and the Queen appeared jumping out of that plane. Because do you remember the ticketing shambles?
Yeah. G4S.
G4S, and that was literally days. That was days. Jeremy Hunt, the culture secretary at the time,
dropped his bell.
He dropped his bell, but he had to go cap in hand to the MOD and say, we need the army to come in and manage the security and manage the bag searches. And that was literally 2 weeks before the Olympics started on that July 27th. But a particular memory for me, and I'm sure you have one in the build-up to it, was there was a couple of days in that week. So Friday the 27th of July was the opening ceremony. The 2 weeks before that, or probably no, it was about 6 weeks before that, wasn't it? When the torch landed.
Yep.
So they lit the flame, and they brought the torch back to Cornwall, and I drove down there to cover it, and I was in a place called RNAS Cold Rose, which was an airfield and a search and rescue place. Never been there. It was the Navy, I think. I was in a field with lots of other media, and David Beckham came along with Princess Anne, Sophie Rayworth, who we know from our time, Michael, as well, and it was one of those moments, and I've gone back and I've read a diary piece that I wrote during the time, Michael, and I said, quote, if this is what the games will be like, it will be crazy, it will be brilliant. And that night was madness, and it totally was. And the country got it, and I think the torch really, not to coin a phrase, but kind of lit up the Olympics for the rest of the country. And did you feel that while you were kind of, in other parts of, because I was in London, but other parts of the UK?
I was in the northeast where I live, and at the time I was living in a village in northeast England called Norton, and it didn't quite come past my front door. It went to Billingham, which is the next town to where I lived, and I literally was able to push my daughter, who at the time was 1 and a bit, and my wife was heavily pregnant with our second child, and I was literally able to walk with my heavily pregnant wife and my daughter 1 and a bit in her pushchair, and I walked to Billingham, and we saw those buses and all the advertising people and everything else. We remember that we saw all that go past, and then we saw the train, and a guy I know, a friend of mine, who's actually chairman of the Disabled Supporters Club at Middlesbrough Football Club, he had the honour, if you like, of carrying the torch from Teesside into Yorkshire. He carried it across the border at the time. So, to have a friend of mine, a guy that I knew, a guy called Paddy Cronsbury, carry that torch and to see it, as I said, not quite go past my front door, but to be able to walk to go and see that torch, as you say, to coin that phrase, lit up the enthusiasm for the games. I think just prior to that, we'd all gone through that point where we'd thought, we'll all get to see a bit of the Olympics. It will touch each and every one of us. And we'd all bid for tickets, and we'd all gone into the ballot, and none of us had got anything. I put in for thousands of pounds worth of tickets in the ballot. If they'd all come off, I'd literally no idea how I was going to pay for them. I remember it was the first time I ever got into Twitter, really, and that was to try and get into trying to buy the tickets. Overseas sellers were advertising themselves on Twitter to try and buy tickets, and that's the first time I remember really using that social media platform to try and get tickets, to try and go and see some of the Olympics.
Yes, it was a whole issue, wasn't it, the tickets? I think they finally managed to get them sorted out, and people did get to a certain number of events that they wanted to, but it certainly wasn't plain sailing in any way. And you're right about Twitter as well. 2012 was when I first discovered it as well. I was like, okay, I need to be on this thing, and boy, has it changed people's lives. Maybe in a good way.
Not always the best, I should point out.
ever since. And then just before we start getting into the games, because that's what people want to hear about, I went to Cardiff for the opening football match where Team GB, the women, were in action, and that was an amazing thing 2 days before the opening ceremony. And then I came back, and the following night it was the Hyde Park party where the Olympic torch was, and I believe Boris Johnson, who was then Mayor of London, was there that night as well, and broadcasting from Hyde Park with 100,000 people was certainly a spectacle. And that opening ceremony, I mean, you've watched it recently, Michael. It's still magical. It's still magical.
Yeah, it's funny, because I was actually on the radio that night. As I said, I'd got laid off from my job in 2005. So by the time 2012 had come around 7 years later, I was a completely freelance broadcaster. And I remember, as a freelance broadcaster, watching the Beijing Olympics at home thinking, next time, 2012 London, I've got to get involved somehow. And I was fortunate that one of the people I was working for was a radio station in Yorkshire, said, yep, we want you to do some Olympic stuff for us. So the night of the opening ceremony, I was actually presenting on the radio. But the main thing I was presenting on the radio that night was a pre-season football match between Leeds and Torquay. And that was the first 3.5 hours of the programme. And then basically the radio station had said to me, you've got carte blanche, stay on the radio. Just keep talking about the Olympics, the opening ceremony, describe it as best you can. I was sat in a studio in Leeds at the time. I had no media guide. I hadn't been to any rehearsal, and basically what I did was I had Hugh Edwards and Hazel Irvine, who were obviously the commentators on the BBC with Trevor Nelson, had them in one ear, had the television on in the studio. I was scrolling the online feed, and I was basically just trying to regurgitate as much of what they were saying and describe what I could see. And I was just listing countries, and a friend of mine, she said she was listening that night. She said, I just presumed you were there. I never imagined you weren't. And I have to say, actually, when I look back at that that opening ceremony, and you revisited your diary recently. I revisited a radio interview I did, and I can't remember the exact occasion. It was a year to go or 500 days to go or whatever, and they were talking about the hopes, or my hopes, for what I thought would be in the opening ceremony. So this is a good year and a bit out from the actual ceremony, and I listened to it again recently, and I said in this, before I knew anything that would actually happen, I said the opening ceremony should involve James Bond, choirs from the nations, should become a cross between Glastonbury, Notting Hill Carnival, Trooping the Colour and the Proms, and should finish with Paul McCartney. And actually, I got quite a bit of it right. And when I listened back...
Did Danny Boyle talk to you?
Well, I don't know whether he heard it or what, but actually when I listened back to that interview, I suggested that at the start of the opening ceremony, they should have a big countdown, and then all of the stadium should go dark, and then there should be one spotlight in the middle of the stadium, and it should be Judi Dench as M from the Bond films to Daniel Craig as James Bond going, "Cup of tea, Mr. Bond?" Because that's what everyone thinks when they think of Great Britain, and they think of London. I actually think Danny Boyle maybe took my Bond idea and did it a little bit better with the whole Queen jumping out of the helicopter.
I remember The Sun led with that on April the 1st, that Bond and the Queen would be in the opening ceremony for the Olympics, and all of us ran it as it was an April Fool, and I think we kind of believed it, but no one could ever prove that it was ever going to happen.
And I have to say
that moment when it happened, it was. I mean, you say you were where you were working. Again, it's difficult. There were so many journalists who were in that stadium who would have a view of it. There were so many people, games makers, who would have been there, people who were part of the ceremony, but I was, like you, Michael, was a non-rights holder, as it's called in Olympic parlance, which means we can cover the games, but we can't broadcast from the actual location that these things are happening. And we've talked about it a little bit before on Anything But Footy. So I was in a tent watching the pictures, as you were, on a television, but I was in a tent on top of the John Lewis car park at Westfield in Stratford, where I spent the next, as you said, 17 days broadcasting from the Olympics and reporting everything that happened as I saw it, and I saw every gold medal won, and I saw everything. But was I in the stadium reporting on it? No, because that's what we weren't allowed to do. That we had to broadcast it from a slightly different location. But I tell you what, those fireworks that when they went off at the end after Macca, it was after Macca.
Yep.
I mean, London shook. And actually, that was it was my indication to go, I'm going home now, because it was gone midnight.
It was.
And I had to get a Thameslink train home, which, as you well know, is a painful experience on the best of times. But those fireworks really set it off, I thought, and it was an amazing night, and it just caught everything. And the NHS thing, I think, is worth highlighting as well.
Do you know what?
That was a special moment.
I still watch the opening ceremony sometimes with my daughter, and that is the bit. She's now 8 years of age, my daughter. That is the bit that is her favourite, the whole NHS Great Ormond Street Hospital sequence. I mean, she loves Mr. Bean, she loves the Industrial Revolution and the way the rings were forged, but it is that sequence with J.K. Rowling and others that she still talks about. I've got to say, when I look back at that opening ceremony, my favourite moment's a bit of a weird one, and actually... I don't know what I will say it because I've brought it up now, but it's that aerial shot of the stadium just before it starts. So the presenters have done their bit. Gary and Gabby and Claire have finished in the studio, and the commentators haven't started. And they cut to that aerial shot of the stadium before we go into the opening sequence with the whole river and everything. And there's that little bit of buzz, that little hum in the air, that genuine fizzle of excitement. And at that point, I think to myself, you know what? Anything's possible. Trevor Nelson might have a good commentary tonight. Anything could happen this evening. And I think that's my favourite moment when I look back at it all.
I loved it. It was 2012, 12 minutes past 8 when the Red Arrows flew across. Look, we've talked for nearly 20 minutes on the...
We've not even got started.
Exactly, on the forerunner, but it was 7 years of build-up, and I think it's important that we look at that. We will, as we continue this Anything But Footy London 2012 special for this summer, we will look at the legacy of the Olympics and whether we've delivered to inspire a generation, as Lord Coe said that we would. But let's get on to the sporting action, because it was, as you rightly said, Michael, 17 days of marvellous entertainment. but it didn't start off
slow
greatly
start.
well, did it?
Slow start. Day 2 was meant to be Mark Cavendish's day. We were all expecting, weren't we? Mark Cavendish at that point, he'd never won an Olympic medal before. In fact, he had to wait and win that silver medal in Rio, as you and I recall, to finally get his hands on an Olympic medal. But it was meant to be Mark Cavendish's day. It was meant to be the men's road race. It was finishing in the centre of London. There were huge
it was Wiggins.
crowds.
Wiggins had won the Tour de France, hadn't he?
And there were huge crowds because obviously it was an event that most people could go and see for free. Yes, the finish was ticketed, but if you watch the scenes on Box Hill, you looked at those scenes and you thought, this might actually be okay. London might actually pull this off. But Mark Cavendish didn't win it. He trailed him way down the field in the end. I don't even recall who won the gold medal that day. But it wasn't the golden start that it was meant to be. I was still actually at home watching all of that on TV. I didn't come down to London until the next day, when Great Britain did finally get on the medal table with Lizzie Armitstead, who no one had been speaking about, winning in the women's road race a silver medal from Otley. And for me, covering it for a radio station from Yorkshire, it was great, of course, because we had a Yorkshire medal on the table. I remember going to see Team GB with my dad at football at Wembley Stadium that day as well. So, I finally arrived at the Olympics, if you like, having sat through the opening ceremony, half covering Torquay Leeds, and then being disappointed with Mark Cavendish. I finally arrived at the Olympics, I think, with Lizzie Armitstead and Britain in the football.
Yeah, and Rebecca Adlington won a bronze on that day as well in the swimming pool, and who would have thought, apart from Michael Jameson, that she would be the only other swimmer to win another medal when she won bronze later on in the games as well. The British swimming team didn't have a great London 2012, but I remember those early days again with my kind of news hat on, the empty seats, because we'd had all this ticketing fiasco where people were like, well, I can't get a ticket, and then you watched it on telly, as you did, and there were loads of empty seats.
Well, I have to say, and I put my hand up and confess here, that there's a reason that 2 seats were empty during the morning session of the Monday swimming, and that is because I actually had bought, I think, tickets, 2 tickets, through an overseas seller, and I decided to take my mum to the swimming on the Monday morning. So I think we're at day 4, if you include the opening ceremony. It was my first visit ever to the park, and I lost the tickets en route.
You lost them?
I lost them. So we got to the park, didn't have the tickets, so we then had to go to
Did the army not let you in?
No, so we had to go to a porter cabin to try and find them, which was a really, really long walk. We finally then did get into the park, at which point my mum tripped over, fell over, cut her knee, and needed some first aid care. So we missed the entire session, and basically we got into the aquatic centre, and you recall the 2 big wings of the aquatic centre. We were right up high, and we got in as everyone else was leaving, and we literally got to the top, took a photo of each other, and got kicked out. Didn't actually see anyone swimming. So I confess 2 of those empty seats were ours on day 4, the first Monday.
But, of course, officially they were the VIP seats, and the IOC, as we well know, and if you were in London in the build-up, you knew they had special Olympic lanes where they were driven in their fast cars, and the rest of London had to suffer, although, frankly, no one was interested by the time the game started. But, again, those empty seats, it was, and they changed it. Actually, London started giving it to volunteers, as I said, games makers, or the army, or reselling those seats, and it became a thing every day. I remember going to a press conference in the media centre every day, and it was like, yep, we've sorted out, we've released more tickets and more things have become available, and that kind of carried on in Rio. So hopefully the IOC have kind of learned, and organising committees as we progress. And I think Paris, will be the next European one, and you can imagine anyone who loved London will be wanting to go to Paris. I think they'll need to make sure that they have more tickets available during the days, and not having those empty seats going forward. So it was July 31st, Michael. 4 or 5 days on, still no gold medal.
Nope.
And the big story, I believe it might have been a Sunday night. No, it might have been a Monday night or a Tuesday night. Zara Phillips won team silver in the 3-day eventing, and it was the first team medal since, bizarrely, her dad in 1972 in the 3-day eventing, and that was a big story, or we thought it was going to be a big story.
Yeah.
It was for that night.
It was, and actually I was feeling really rough that day. I felt really ill, and as I heard news of that medal, I was actually sat in the medical centre of London 2012.
After your mum, and then you.
Yeah, I was feeling really ill, and you know I love a medical centre during a major games, because you did see me in a wheelchair, I think, during Glasgow 2014 after getting a monumental blister on my foot, which actually nearly made one of the Scottish judokas physically sick. But anyway, that's for another story. So I was feeling ill, I was in the medical centre, and I'd just been diagnosed with hand, foot and mouth disease, which is, as someone with a young boy, you'll know it is prevalent amongst young children, something I'd have clearly caught off my daughter. And I was waiting to get my prescription, thinking, I simply can't go back and start shaking hands with the British Olympic team. I'll spread hand, foot and mouth disease. But I got this message saying, eventing team silver, press conference, it's on in 40 minutes. And as I said, I was covering the games for Yorkshire. There was a Northallerton rider, Nicola Wilson. So I was like, well, I've got to go back and get an interview with Nicola Wilson. And I can remember Nicola Wilson, Mary King, Christina Cook, William Fox-Pitt and the aforementioned Zara Phillips came out. And we were all told at Team GB House, which is where these press conferences were held for the likes of you and I, who weren't the BBC or NBC or the rights holders. This is the kind of secondary press conferences, if you like. We were all told, whatever we did, we can ask about the event, winning the medal, but please don't ask Zara Phillips about her connections to the royal family, being the Queen's granddaughter, of course. Question 1. Zara, have you had any message from your grandmother about today? Not from me, I should point out. Question 2. Zara, you got your medal from your mother, the Queen's daughter. Has the Queen's daughter, or indeed the Queen, said anything to you about winning the medal? At which point, basically, William Fox-Pitt said, you know what? We've had enough. They'd done a load of media, of course, by this point, and they pretty much walked out of the press conference, and with it, all the journalists walked out as well. And I hung about, actually, and the team re-emerged after a lot of the media had gone, and I grabbed Nicola Wilson for an interview, explaining that it was for the people of Yorkshire and she was from Northallerton, and we talked for 5 minutes. She was very happy to do it, and then I just saw Zara Phillips sat there. I thought, well, now or never, why not? And she was lovely. She was fantastic. And we did a great interview about winning the silver medal, and what it meant to her, and what it meant following, as you said, in her family's footsteps with her mother as well. And there was none of that. I mean, I was careful in the way I phrased my questions, of course, but of course we all wanted a line about the fact the Queen's granddaughter had won a medal at London 2012. But I remember leaving that day thinking, despite my hand, foot and mouth disease, I've got a couple of decent interviews in the bag here.
And you're absolutely right. And I was working alongside you, obviously, for a different radio station at the time. And this was the big story. It was like, well, if I don't get an interview with Zara Phillips, my boss is going to turn around to me to go, why am I spending all this money with you jollying, as a lot of people thought it was, at the Olympics? And you're right. We managed to get an interview with her, and I also did an interview with her, and she was lovely. And going back in my diary, I put that that they didn't want to do any interviews, but they did do some radio interviews afterwards, and we were lucky to get that, and that was really the big story at the time. This is an Anything But Footy special, London 2012 for the summer of 2019, 7 years on. We will talk about the legacy and a certain Mayor of London at the time, Boris Johnson, before the end of this podcast, but we're half an hour in, and we're not quite through 4 days of the Olympics, so bear with us and stick with us on this Anything But Footy special.
Quick footnote to the Zara Phillips thing, by the way. The following morning, I was going into Team GB House to interview Sarah Barrow, who was a diver who had dived with Tonya Couch, and I was arriving about 8 o'clock in the morning, and the medalists have to go through this huge, long process of interviews. Certainly the following morning they have to do the rounds of the Breakfast TV studios, and Zara Phillips was coming out of Team GB House as I was going in, at which point I went, me, Zara, you look knackered. And it was, I don't know why the words came out of my mouth. I swore twice at the Queen's granddaughter. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to the Tower. I'm going to the Tower for this. And Zara went, do you know what? We've been up since 4 o'clock. We've hardly slept. I am knackered. And I am tired. And she swore twice back at me. And just a final little bit about that was, as I said, I went in to see Sarah Barrow, the diver, and her and Tonya Couch were offered return tickets to anywhere by British Airways to do a personal appearance that day, having finished their competition. And they're like, yeah, whatever, we'll do that. And I was thinking, brilliant, return tickets to anywhere from British Airways. Tonya Couch thought they meant train tickets. She didn't realise she could have gone to Auckland or Sydney or Los Angeles with it. But yes, they toddled off after my interviews to go and do their personal appearance, and hopefully they went somewhere nice.
So August the 1st, 2012, Great Britain, and we've talked about the medals. A reminder that we won 65 in total, including 29 golds. August the 1st was the first gold that we won, and what a gold it was. It was Helen Glover and Heather Stanning, the first women rowing gold for Britain as well in the history of that sport. And I remember, again, covering that from the car park, overlooking the Olympic Park, and it was just before... I was watching the race, and it was just before the top of the hour. I believe it might have been midday, and I can remember phoning the newsroom going, we're going to win a gold, we're going to go win a gold, because we knew that Glover and Stanning, they were unbeaten. And they carried that on really until Rio as well, where they defended their title. They were unbeaten. We knew that they were going to get a gold. This was more than we thought Mark Cavendish might win a gold on the first day. This we knew was a dead cert.
It was nailed on.
Yeah, exactly. And I remember phoning and saying, I'm going to have to do a live into the news bulletin. And, of course, it became the lead story because they won the gold straight away. And it was like our Team GB's first gold. And I can remember coming on the radio and literally not screaming, because that would be unprofessional, but it was one of my highlights. Yeah, one of the highlights of the Olympics, being able to tell hundreds of thousands of people that Team GB had won their first gold of the London 2012 Olympics, and fully deserved from Glover and Stanning, who we obviously met and interviewed later on as well. And of course, as per usual with London buses, the golds continued from that point on, and Wiggins stormed the time trial to become the most decorated Olympian with his fourth gold and seventh medal of his career. And this guy had spread the cult of cycling. And there is a picture of him sitting on a throne at Hampton Court, which I don't think will ever be rivalled. And in Olympic history.
I wasn't at Hampton Court that day because my dad had got lucky with a couple of tickets for the hockey, so I was taking a couple of hours out of my reporting duties, and I'd gone to see Team GB in the hockey. And from our position, we're at the top of the stands in the Lee Valley Park, we could see the big screens, we could see what was going on with Bradley Wiggins, and we weren't the only ones, obviously, that could see. And suddenly... This noise, this wall of noise started dripping down the terraces, if you like. And it was people singing the national anthem because we were watching Bradley Wiggins, we were seeing him at Hampton Court on the throne. And the national anthem was being sung by the crowd as word got around. They'd followed up that rowing gold with another gold in the cycling now. And you could see, actually, that I think it was the men's hockey team. It was definitely Great Britain. And they were looking around going, what is going on here? Why have we got thousands of people singing God Save the Queen? And it was all because, as well as watching the hockey, we were following in that multi-screen way that we were in 2012 and looking at the big screens in the park. We were following that as well. And Bradley Wiggins had won the second gold.
And it really did kind of snowball from that point on. As I said, we've talked about how many Team GB won, but Super Saturday obviously came along on the second Saturday of the Games, Michael. 6 golds, 3 in 45 minutes in the Olympic Stadium. The greatest sporting day in British history. I had this conversation quite recently because obviously with the Cricket World Cup...
Yep.
With what happened at Lords. Obviously, I wasn't around for the World Cup in '66.
Rugby team in 2003, Johnny Wilkinson goes close.
But I still think that Super Saturday, because we won some rowing golds in that, I just think...
Some rowing golds.
The men's 4.
Super Saturday for me was very important from a Yorkshire point of view because aside from Jessica Ennis, those some rowing goals included North Yorkshire's Cat Copeland and Hepton's Andrew Triggs Hodge in the Cox's 4. And I'd actually come home from the Games on the Friday because as I mentioned, my wife was heavily pregnant during London 2012. So the agreement was that I would come home for the Friday night and the Saturday night. And in fact, I got home on the Friday night and I saw the men's team pursuit cyclist win gold, which included another Yorkshireman, Ed Clancy. And I had to jump on the radio in my spare bedroom into the Sport at 6 programme. So I've just watched Ed Clancy. I said, tomorrow we've got Jessica Ennis in the heptathlon. We've got Kat Copeland, Andrew Triggs-Hodge. We could win 3 golds for Yorkshire tomorrow. And I uttered these words: if Yorkshire was a country. And then I mentioned it would be higher than Japan, Australia, whatever in the medal table, and it was a phrase that caught on social media. So halfway through kind of Super Saturday, we'd seen the rowing golds, we'd seen Laura Trott, Danny King, and Joe Rousel win. We had Jessica Ennis. I think she won the first gold of the night on Super Saturday. She'd had an amazing 2 days of competition, and we were watching Mo Farah, who I think brought the curtain down. We'd seen Greg Rutherford, at which point my wife said, "You've got to go back to London, haven't you?" Yes, I'm leaving you with a 1-year-old and your huge belly. I'm back to the Olympics.
But those 45 minutes, I think you could argue the Cricket World Cup 45 minutes would be well up there and probably ahead of the Rugby World Cup.
Yep.
The extra time of 66, I think is debatable, but I'm just not sure we're ever going to get quite a sporting day in the stadium that had so much rankles about what they were going to do with it, who was going to be ending up in it, and we'll talk about that before the end of this London 2012 Anything But Footy special. But I just think Ennis, Hill, Rutherford, Mo Farah, it's going to be the thing that we will continue to talk about London 2012 for the rest of eternity.
It was a great British day, and I think that's quite important. You talk about 66, you talk about 2003, you talk about 2019. They're English days, aren't they? It's England. I'm married to a woman from Glasgow. She has literally no interest in what happened in 1966, 2003, or indeed at the cricket in 2019. But she does talk about London 2012 and Super Saturday. It was a day that resonated from Land's End, where that flame first arrived, to John O'Groats and beyond. It resonated around the world. The names that day that won medals from, and what we talk about diversity. We talked about diversity in the ceremonies, for example, but the diversity of that day, from Mo Farah to Jessica Ennis to Greg Rutherford. We talked about those rowers and we named them. We talked about the cyclists as well. It was just such an inclusive day, wasn't it? It was just an amazing, inclusive 12, 15 hours of sport. And it was an inclusive 15 hours, 12 hours of sport for Great Britain and all 4 corners of the nation.
3 other memories that I'm going to highlight before we talk about the Paralympics, because that was, again, a great 2 weeks of London's history. The cyclists. So, as I've mentioned, I spent most of my time in a car park covering the Olympics, but because the velodrome was right next to it, I did manage to go into that venue and watch some sport while not broadcasting every hour. It was an amazing atmosphere, and 8 golds, 8 British golds, the emergence of Laura Trott, obviously now Laura Kenny, as a 19-year-old. She's going to be, or she's already the most successful British female Olympian. That will continue, no doubt, in Tokyo. And that velodrome, the tickets were hot stuff. The cycling was hotter. It was, and frankly, the venue was boiling. It was an incredible place to be. So that is one of my highlights, and made sure when I went to Rio, I spent more time in the velodrome than I actually did at London. Andy Murray winning at Wimbledon, so the tennis gold medal at Wimbledon.
Anna Silva.
Literally, Anna Silva, but literally weeks after bursting into tears after losing to Federer on the same court at Centre Court in the Wimbledon final. That made Andy Murray the British hero, because before that he was seen as Scottish when he lost to all the English people, but he became the British hero at that point for me, and not just for me because I was a fan of him before that, but for everybody. That was the moment that Andy Murray became Sir Andy Murray in a lot of people's eyes. That was incredible. And actually Tom Daley jumping into the pool after winning a bronze medal in the diving with the rest of his team. That was important. It wasn't just him. His whole team was so delighted for him a year after losing his dad. I mean, we've talked about Tom Daley on Anything But Footy so many times. That was a moment that lives long in the memory. And for me, they were the three other really special moments of London 2012 that I really wanted to mention.
And to add to that roundup, would totally agree with you on Tom Daley. There were two medals for me that were the highlights of the Games, and Tom Daley's bronze was one of them. First individual diving medal at an Olympics for Britain since 1960. He was a European champion at 13. He went to Beijing, the Olympics, at 14. He was a world champion at 15 and an Olympic bronze medal at 18. His bronze medal for me, and has really set the tone, I think, for what the likes of Jack Law and Chris Mears and others are doing now. The other one I'd like to mention was Beth Tweddle, her bronze medal, because I do believe that Beth Tweddle has really set the gymnastics programme up for Team GB, and I think the likes of Max Whitlock and Niall Wilson, the Downey sisters and others are benefiting now from the hard yards that Beth Tweddle put in, and I think for her to win a bronze medal at an ancient age for a gymnast, in actual fact, at London 2012, it was a huge achievement. Nicola Adams winning a gold medal for Leeds in the boxing. I remember doing a very brief interview with her late that night, but I was very grateful to the Team GB press office to get me a couple of minutes with Nicola Adams. Like you, I would have had a boss on my phone going, why didn't you get the interview with Nicola Adams? And I remember, we talked, didn't we, about the tickets and the lottery of going for the tickets. My friend and we said, whatever tickets we get, we'll share. I got tickets to the handball. He got tickets to the men's 100 metres final. So seeing Usain Bolt in that stadium on that Sunday night, and then having to rush to that Andy Murray press conference and interview Andy Murray and Laura Robson that you mentioned after the gold and the silver medal, but seeing Usain Bolt in that stadium, you talk about people like Michael Phelps, people like David Rudisha. We've been very British focused in our review, but let's mention people like David Rudisha, Michael Phelps, and of course Usain Bolt. If Usain Bolt hadn't won the 100 metres in London in 2012, it wouldn't have been quite the same event. So for him to do it and then back it up, of course, in the 200 metres, and that was actually the night of the handball, so we got to watch it on the big screen in the park, and relays, of course, as well. Medals came there for him at the time, of course, as well. So, those are just a couple of other things I would like to mention.
Really well said. This is an Anything But Footy, the unashamedly Olympic and Paralympic sport focused podcast, and this is our first summer special, remembering the highs, lows, dramas and celebrations of all things 2012. Anthony Joshua won the last Team GB gold on the final day, the 29th gold medal. The closing ceremony was dreadful. Michael's just watched it, but I can't believe you've watched it again. The Spice Girls were horrific.
The Spice Girls, if they found a note, it wasn't on the DVD. I think Dreadful's sort of overplaying it. It wasn't as good as the opening ceremony.
And but it wasn't supposed to be. It wasn't supposed to be. It was supposed to be a party.
The sound quality, I think, when you watch it back, and probably watched it live on the night, didn't help. I didn't think the sound quality did much for the likes of Suggs, the Kaiser Chiefs, but George Michael choosing the opportunity of that huge global audience to promote his brand new single was a bit of an odd one as well. But yeah, I have just watched it again, and 7 years on wasn't as bad as I recalled it at the time. And I remember watching it, and I watched it on a little monitor, and I shed a tear. I'll be honest with you. London 2012, it wasn't over because we had the Paralympics, and actually I had tickets for the closing ceremony of the Paralympics with Rihanna and Coldplay. That was
and that was brilliant.
It was absolutely brilliant. And to have been in the stadium that night was amazing. But the closing ceremony, I did shed a little tear that night, and not because it was bad, not because of the way the Spice Girls sounded, but just because it was such a huge build-up, wasn't it? And not just the 7 years and the 17 days, but everything that had gone on before that. And it was just so wonderful to think, London did it and did it right, as Lord Coe said.
But it was ready to do it all again 2 weeks later, and the Paralympics gave people more chance to see sport that people hadn't had the chance with the ticket fiasco for the Olympics. And like Team GB, Para GB came behind China and Russia in third place, winning 120 medals in total: 34 gold, 43 silver, and 43 bronze. Sarah Story and David Weir won 4 golds each, and the Weirwolf was incredible. Dame Sarah Story, and both of them are still going on now. Rio obviously didn't work out for David Weir, but he was absolutely incredible on the track in the Olympic Stadium. And for Super Saturday, it was Thursday the 6th of September, Thriller Thursday, as I called it, for Mo, Jess and Greg Reed, David Weir, Hannah Cockcroft, Johnny Peacock. One of my greatest memories of the Paralympics is being in the stadium, and this was what was different for me, because we were broadcasting as much as we had for the Olympics, but I didn't necessarily have to do it live, and it meant that I could go and watch the sport and then run outside and record for the news bulletins. And being there and seeing Johnny Peacock with his name being cheered and chanted, Peacock, Peacock, in the Olympic Stadium, I mean, he must have, spine-tingling memories of that. Anyone who was there would have as well. It was a thrilling Thursday, as I say, and it was just another 2 weeks where London sparkled in the sunshine and sport.
Yeah, and you know that, I'm sort of name-dropping here, but I know Hannah Cockcroft pretty well. Got to know Hannah Cockcroft pretty well since that summer of 2012, and, if David Bowie's Heroes comes on the radio or is on a smart speaker somewhere, anywhere in her presence, she must just have a little, as you say, tingle down the spine there, because when they came in on that opening ceremony of the Paralympics with David Bowie's Heroes, and what unfolded for the likes of Hannah Cockcroft, who was pretty much unknown, I would say, to the general public, and is now a household name, is now someone that is quite rightly on the stage at Sports Personality of the Year from time to time as a contender for those awards. When she hears that piece of music, when she looks back at those images of the Paralympics, I think London, if there was a wonderful legacy from London and the Paralympics, it was that it took the Paralympics to not just the next step, it took it up 3 flights of stairs, didn't it, really, in terms of the way it was presented. It wasn't seen as a secondary event. It wasn't seen as an add-on to an Olympic Games. It wasn't an equal event. And, we got fantastic coverage of it. The coverage of the Paralympics in Tokyo will be even bigger and better as far as the media is concerned, television is concerned. But I really do think there was a step change as far as Paralympic sport was concerned with London 2012.
And I think we need to praise Channel 4 because of that.
Yeah,
because,
absolutely. Absolutely.
They took the rights, and they took a risk, and they took the rights, and they've carried it on and supported it ever since. But they came up with, the way to celebrate sport, and it is sport, and it is what everybody was cheering about, and they just nailed it. And the Paralympians, the British Paralympians in particular, nailed it. But, it wasn't just a British thing. Oscar Pistorius that night was huge. Those games, I mean, whatever happened to him afterwards, but, he was a massive name. And, of course, he competed at London 2012 in for South Africa in the Olympics, and then came to the Paralympics as well. And I was in a stadium and saw him lose and win. To lose to Johnny Peacock, but then win as well in a later event. I mean, that was a story that absolutely needed telling, and Channel 4 were right behind that. And as I say, a couple of other mentions: the Royal Artillery Barracks, where the shooting was. I went to watch Danielle Brown win archery gold there, and that was incredible. That venue, they just did. In Woolwich, they'd just done it so well, and it was really nice to see these amazing locations in London really sparkling with the sport. And the Paralympic tennis at Eton Manor, where there is still tennis, but it's now the hockey centre as well. You're absolutely right, Michael. The legacy, I think, and we'll talk about that now, the legacy certainly from London 2012 has to be a big part of it is the success of the Paralympics, and that has continued to develop And when it takes a step back, which sometimes it does, everybody goes and turns around and says, well, look, this was all happened in 2012. It needs to get back to at least this level, if not even more.
And 2017, when the IPC World Championships were held in London, of course, alongside the IAAF World Championships, we saw full arenas for morning and afternoon sessions, and that was again just a knock-on effect from the way London stages these events. And I cover quite a lot of grassroots sport, if you like, alongside things like Great North Runs, London Marathons, World Series Triathlons, Ride London, and as well as the elite events, as I say, I cover quite a lot of the grassroots bit, which is the mass participation. And when you interview people at the end of those events and you go up to people, they've just completed a triathlon in Leeds that the Brownlees might be doing in a couple of hours' time, and you say to them, well, what got you here? What got you on that start line? They talk about Johnny Brownlee, they talk about Alistair Brownlee, they talk about Vicky Holland, London Marathon. What got you on the start line? Why were you one of 55,000 doing the Great North Run today? Why did you want to run to South Shields? And they mention people like Mo Farah. They talk about David Weir. You talk to cyclists, they mention names like Victoria Pendleton and Chris Hoy. And whenever you have a discussion about legacy, about London 2012 and what it did, all of those names that I've just mentioned brought people out to try sport and do sport. And it's at those big mass participation events, I think, the people behind Mo Farah in the London Marathon and the Great North Run, the people behind the Brownlees, the people behind Victoria Pendleton, Chris Hoy, Mark Cavendish at the Ride London event as well. It's all those other people, I think, taking part in those big mass participation events that started doing it, got on their bike, got their trainers out, decided to jump in a lake on a Sunday morning because of the Olympics and because the Olympics and the Paralympics came to London.
Yeah, and you can't imagine Park Run really happening before London 2012.
Great example.
Yeah. Did it inspire a generation? I mean, officially, less people are now officially playing sport, according to the figures from the government, from Sport England, Sport Scotland, etc., etc. Less people are actually now playing sport than 2012. So that is a disappointment when you look at just stats. But then I kind of agree with what you've already said, which there's so many other ways of being active that, maybe that's, just done enough to get to the point where it was worth it. It cost £9 billion.
A lot of money.
It's still costing us money. The mayor of London at the time, Boris Johnson, did a deal with West Ham, who they pay £10 million a season to rent a stadium. There's also the Orbit, which he put up, which he approved and wanted up there, that red thing, and it's a marvellous thing, and it's a great view of London. But 3 years after London 2012, they had to put a slide on it. Again, it's brilliant. The slide is fantastic, and it's a great thing, but it was losing money. Yeah, it was losing money hand over fist.
Whatever happened to that Johnson character? Did he go on and achieve anything at all after being mayor of London and the Olympics?
I think that's a bigger question than anything but footy can ask.
Has he got a job now?
But I think they are the question marks, and we know
doping.
Doping. So many people are losing medals still and getting retested from that. And when you think we've got the Commonwealth...
69 athletes, I think, have lost medals. I mean, Jeremy Hunt said it was going to be the cleanest Olympics ever, which when you take that sentence out of context is a pretty naive thing to say. Cleanest Olympics ever, but what I would say is they've caught more dopers than at Athens and Beijing combined. They've still got, as we speak, 2 more years of retesting because there's a statute of limits of 10 years on retesting doping. So you could say that more medals have gone to the right people, we hope, at London 2012, and therefore I guess you could then make an argument it is the cleanest Olympics ever. But to be at nearly 60 failed doping tests is obviously a concern, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely disappointing. And we know the Olympic Park is an amazing place and millions of people have gone and seen it. And we've talked about the sporting events that continue to be held there. But it does cost us money, but they're building more houses. There are schools on there. There's amazing transport links. But is it all worth it? I would sit here and say it has been worth it. But what I want Birmingham 2022 to learn from is, because we've already talked about that in an Anything But Footy edition before, that it's going to cost us slightly more than it did for Glasgow. And I don't think in Glasgow we ever, with the 2014 Commonwealth Games, there wasn't that much kind of fear that places were going to end up empty. But in Birmingham, they're having to make the Alexander Stadium into a bigger stadium. They're having to, in Perry Bar, build an athletes' village, and then they need to make sure that those are given to people who need the housing. That's what we want to learn. So when we do the Olympics again for a fourth time, we get it right. We get it right. That's what I would like.
Yeah, I think, and I'm clearly biased. Why would I be co-hosting a podcast called Anything But Footy, an unashamed Olympic and Paralympic podcast, if I wasn't an enthusiast of the Olympics, of the Paralympic movement as well? I think that the way the country was for that period of time, and it wasn't just the 17 days of the Olympics and then the couple of weeks of the Paralympics, but the whole build-up that year, the little gap, obviously, between the Olympics and the Paralympics, the Diamond Jubilee and everything else. For that period of time, I think Great Britain felt like a decent place to be. It felt like a good nation to be a part of. Went on our summer holidays that year, and people were talking about Great Britain in good, glowing terms. I'm just back from a summer holiday this year, and I'm sat with the barman at the all-inclusive, and he just wants to talk about one word to me, and that word is Brexit. And I don't want to end too politically, but I think you can't quite quantify in financial terms the feel-good factor that hosting an Olympics and a Paralympics had. We witnessed it in London. We witnessed it in Rio. I'm pretty sure that we'll both witness it again in Tokyo. And yes, there's a huge cost. Yes, you can make significant arguments that wouldn't that money be better spent on new roads, new railways, new hospitals, new schools, whatever. But sometimes you need just to throw a party and let your hair down. And that's what we did in 2012. And I think from that point of view, it was worthwhile.
And people actually spoke on the tube as well. Games makers volunteering. The legacy of that should not be underestimated as well. That has changed, I think, a lot of people's views and doing things for the society. As apart from what you've already said, that B word. The Games Makers Choir, for example, who are still performing and doing opening ceremonies at the Hockey World Cup and all that. That is legacy for me, very much so. So. That is the first of our summer specials on Anything But Footy, the unashamedly Olympic and Paralympic sport-focused podcast. We hope you've enjoyed it. Don't forget, if we missed your special 2012 moment, then tell us at Anything But F on Twitter or message us on Insta and Facebook. Please download the podcast. Please tell people about it. Share the link. Please rate us on iTunes or your normal podcast provider. Tell people about Anything But Footy as we build up for Tokyo 2020. And our second summer special will be looking ahead to Tokyo 2020. And we're looking forward to doing that in the next couple of weeks. But as you can tell, for Michael and I, London 2012 will long live in the memory for us. But as the then Mayor of London, a certain Boris Johnson, said, London has staged the most extraordinary event we can remember in our lifetimes, and which we will remember for the rest of our lives.